Cynthia's feet ached as she made her way down the long dimly lit hallway of the theater. The exhaustion from hours of rehearsal and performance was heavy on her body, but there was another feeling that pulled her forward. It was hunger, a gnawing need for food that had become a constant companion after each of her performances. The smell of the theater, perfumes from her costume, the lingering scent of stage makeup, and the faint sweat from the dancers, still hung in the air. But all Cynthia could think about was getting something warm to eat. She had long learned that the only time she truly felt at ease after a long night was when she was in the kitchen with Vincent. The theater was a place of intense emotion and pressure, but Vincent's kitchen, though small and tucked away, was always a place where she could finally let her guard down. At the back of the building, where the kitchen door always stood slightly ajar, Cynthia felt a wave of comfort wash over her. The soft, golden light spilled out into the alley, guiding her steps as she neared. The warm glow seemed to call to her, and she couldn't help but breathe in the deep, rich scents that floated from the kitchen. The combination of garlic sizzling in olive oil, the sweetness of butter, and the earthy aroma of herbs filled the air, familiar and welcoming. She gently pushed open the door, which creaked just slightly, a sound that had become as reassuring as the smell. Vincent was always there, working, lost in the rhythms of his craft. No matter how late it was, the sight of him standing over the stove, focused and precise, was always a kind of quiet reassurance for her after the chaos of the stage. Vincent didn't turn to greet her immediately, but he didn't have to. His voice, rough yet warm, was all the invitation Cynthia needed. "Late again?" he asked, his tone carrying a hint of dry humor. But there was no judgment in it, just acknowledgement of the routine they had fallen into over the last few months. A quiet bond built not on words, but on shared moments. Cynthia gave him a smile, though her body was already sinking into the stool at the counter. She was too tired to talk much tonight, but the comfort of the kitchen felt like home. "Wouldn't be me if I wasn't." "What's cooking tonight?" she asked, the words coming easily, like an old script they both knew by heart. Cynthia had come to trust Vincent's cooking with a certainty she hadn't found in many other things. Each night she showed up, expecting something delicious and always receiving it. Vincent looked over his shoulder, his expression a mix of focus and familiarity. "Sautéed mushrooms with thyme, a little butter," he said, pausing as he considered. "Thinking about pairing it with some seared duck breast." His voice was deep, almost meditative, as he worked. The food he prepared always felt like an art to Cynthia. It wasn't just about the taste or the technique, it was the care he put into it, the way he approached each dish with the same kind of dedication she put into her dancing. There was an artistry in how he moved around the kitchen, each motion fluid and practiced. Cynthia envied that skill, that ability to create something beautiful with his hands. But for her, tonight was a simple night, and she was fine with that. "If it's not pasta, it's too complicated for me," she replied with a laugh, pulling her stool closer to the counter. Vincent rolled his eyes at her jokingly, but there was affection in his expression. "If I made you pasta, you'd eat the entire pot in 5 minutes," he said, his words punctuated by a small, knowing chuckle. Cynthia grinned at the teasing remark, though she knew it was true. She had a tendency to devour her food quickly when it was something she liked, and pasta was one of those things. But tonight, she didn't have the energy for pasta. She was too tired to appreciate the lightness of it. Instead, she looked at Vincent as he continued to work, noting the precision with which he handled each ingredient. It was like watching a dancer practice. The grace in his movements matched her own rhythm on stage. The shared silence between them felt easy, natural. There was no need for words when they were together. Food and dance had become the medium through which they communicated. Cynthia settled into the quiet rhythm of the kitchen, watching Vincent carefully chop and season the ingredients. It was almost like the act of cooking was an extension of his soul, the way he seemed to pour his emotions into the food without even realizing it. Her eyes softened as she watched him. There was something beautiful in the way he focused on his task. The way he used the knife, steady and sure, made her think of her own movements on stage, graceful, yet deliberate. It had taken years of training for her to move the way she did, and she could tell that Vincent had spent just as much time honing his craft. She broke the silence with a question that had been on her mind for a while. "You ever miss it?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. It was a simple question, but there was an undertone of something more. "Miss what?" Vincent replied, glancing over his shoulder, his brow furrowing slightly. Cynthia could see that the question caught him off guard, but she wasn't going to back down. "Performing. Dancing," Cynthia clarified, her fingers absent-mindedly tapping on the edge of the counter as she waited for his answer. She could see him pause, considering the question. Vincent had never spoken much about his past, only hinting at it in bits and pieces over the months. Cynthia knew that he had once had dreams of performing, of being on stage, but something had shifted along the way. Life, responsibilities, or maybe just the weight of time had altered his path. But still, she couldn't help but wonder if he ever thought about it, about what might have been. Vincent finally wiped his hands on his apron, then turned fully to face her. His eyes softened, and he shrugged slightly, as though the answer didn't really matter anymore. "Sometimes," he said simply. "I used to want to be on stage too." But, he trailed off, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm good here. My stage is this kitchen now. And you, well, you have the audience you deserve." Cynthia nodded, reflecting on his words. There was something about them that resonated with her. She had often felt the weight of her own dreams, the sacrifices that had been made in pursuit of a career in dance. She had given up so much, but in the end, it had led her to moments like these, moments of quiet companionship with Vincent. She thought about how he spoke of his kitchen as his stage, and how she had found her own kind of performance in the movements of her body. Dance had been everything to her, and yet she had come to realize that it wasn't the only thing that mattered. There were other stages in life, and other ways of finding fulfillment. The way Vincent had embraced his craft, even though it wasn't what he had initially envisioned, made her think about how life sometimes takes you down unexpected roads. She could sense his peace in that realization, and it gave her comfort. The dish he placed before her was as beautiful as always, seared duck breast resting next to a delicate mound of sautéed mushrooms, all drenched in a rich sauce. The colors were vivid against the white plate, the dish as thoughtfully composed as a choreographed dance. Cynthia took her first bite, and she felt a rush of warmth spread through her. The flavors were perfectly balanced, the richness of the duck complemented by the earthiness of the mushrooms, the freshness of the herbs adding a final touch of brightness. She didn't need to say anything, the food spoke for itself. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the meal but for the quiet moments she shared with Vincent, moments that were grounded in something as simple and beautiful as food. She set her fork down, a smile tugging at her lips. "Don't say anything," Vincent warned as he stepped back, watching her expectantly. But Cynthia couldn't help herself. Her eyes sparkled as she tasted the food, and she finally broke into a grin. "You know, you could have put this on the menu. It's perfect." Her words were full of admiration, and she couldn't help but feel a little light-hearted in this simple exchange. Vincent snorted in amusement but said nothing, his face betraying the smallest hint of pride. "I don't need a menu to prove I'm a chef," he said, his tone playful, though his eyes glinted with an almost imperceptible softness. "I just need you to stop complaining about my food." Cynthia laughed, the sound a little lighter than before. But beyond the humor in his words, there was an undeniable warmth in the way he spoke to her, a comfort that made her feel understood. It was in these quiet moments that she realized how deeply they had come to rely on each other, not just for food, but for something more, something unspoken,